Our first panel is the United Nations has declared 2022 and 2032 as the Decade of Indigenous Languages. How can artistic practice support language revitalization efforts, and how can this celebration support community well-being? I want you guys to enjoy the panelists, which are here from around the world today across the circumpolar north, as they reflect on opportunities to strengthen Indigenous languages through the arts and beyond. And I would like to introduce our moderator, Barbara Filion, who will be doing the moderating for this first session. So enjoy, everyone, and I'm going to pass it over to Barbara.
Chinashkumitin, Kwekwe, bonjour, hello. Kedain Sutat, a Tlingit word that I've just been taught by my friend Tina here, which means welcoming a beautiful day. We're going to start off with a song. Hans Henrik has graciously agreed to gift us a song to just set the right tone for our panel today. Thank you.
So I'm going to be singing in Greenlandic, which is my mother tongue, and we'll talk about the song afterwards. Unwangasin naokpait sinetuma nuaner sumik alarumanga misigisak nuaner nalunagu inunerub nuanersub alarumanga aqusinek inuninun allangueqiso misiganga aqusarlugu idinikuma asavagid asavagid asangakpagid sinnetum unuami takorlortaga akunemi atasak namangida kinanerid tamad nasuyasallu misigisak inuninun allangu eqiso qudamnanga misigida qullungu ilagisaqiyaqarlutsi asavagid asavagid asangakpagid sinnatum unuami takorlortaga sinnatum unuami takorlortaga.
That was beautiful. Also reminded me that sometimes we don't need translations to understand things. So language is more than communication in that sense, right? Thank you. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this song?
Yes, it's a song of our great singers, songwriters from Greenland, Rasmus Lypat, and it was sung in Greenlandic. And this song is telling how he met this beautiful girl in his dreams. And in one of the lyrics, it says, 1 hour is not enough to tell you about who you are. And I just want to say, we are a lot of people with history, and I thought it was appropriate to sing that song. It's a love song to someone. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Hoyen.
And 1 hour will not be enough for us to convey, I think, the richness of Indigenous languages, which is what we're here to talk about today. Tanishinikashin, Barbara Filion. My name is Barbara Filion. I'm a member of the Innu Nation from Mashtouiach Pequakami in Quebec. I'm also here today as a representative of the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, so UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. Thank you to Kwan Lindun First Nation and to An Gwachan Council for welcoming us here in their territory and hosting us in this really beautiful longhouse. And thank you to the elders yesterday for starting us off in a good way, and to Phil Gansby for lighting and keeping the fire. It's really an honor to be moderating this intergenerational and international panel today that's going to explore the connections that are inextricable between Indigenous languages, land, culture, and art. The Canadian Commission for UNESCO is proud to collaborate with the Arctic Arts Summit to host this panel as part of our efforts to raise visibility and awareness for the UN's International Decade of Indigenous Languages, which just started this year. The decade is both personally and professionally important to me. I did not have the opportunity to learn my language, Inuamun. I've given myself a decade to learn how to order a moose meat sandwich in Inuamun. Just kidding. But in all seriousness, my personal goal is to express myself in the language of my ancestors in a way that they weren't always allowed to do. So UN decades are created to draw the attention of decision makers and the general public to complex issues, to call for collective awareness and concrete commitments. This decade is an urgent call to action. Some linguists predict that 50 to 90% of the 7,000 languages in the world today, most of them being indigenous, will go extinct in the next century. Languages are the roots of cultural identity. They nourish us and they guide our ways of thinking and doing. Each indigenous language reflects unique worldviews, values that are linked to the environment, to spirituality, our traditions, relationships, to community and individual well-being. Every language is important. It enriches the cultural web of humanity, and when one strand or one language is weakened, the whole web is weakened. We have a decade to create sustainable structures and enact solutions building on the ongoing work of our ancestors and many of you here today and around the world. We'll be exploring today the interconnectivity between land, language, and art. But before delving into our conversation, I'll ask Sky Dau, Tina Jules, an Indigenous language educator, and many more things that she'll tell us about later, just to give us an overview of the languages of this territory, their status, and maybe give us a few greetings also in the languages.
Sure. Gonna stish. So yak e tutat takat yuan. Gonna stish tagish kwan ka kwan lin kwan ha ani kach hidat ye ye. Skyda u yuchatu so klingak enach. My Tlingit name is Skyda u. In the Yukon, we have 14 First Nation governments, 11 of them with self-government agreements, and we have 8 different languages. 2 distinct language families. There's Tlingit, and then there's the Dene languages. In all of those languages, as many people know, especially on the panel here, there are dialects within each language. And there are also differences in writing, which is part of the dialects. All of our languages in the Yukon are in an absolute critical state. We have communities where we don't have a fluent speaker that is living to support our new learners or to teach the language. In the majority of our communities now, we have the fluent speakers we have left are really elderly. They're quite often can't work for a whole day due to being old and some health issues. In many of our communities, we're lucky if we have one or two capable, healthy, fluent speakers that can come and help us with learning the language. So when we say a critical state, in many of our communities, it's under 5 speakers, living fluent speakers, highly fluent, the type that can say anything they want with spontaneity. They don't have to study or anything like that. We have a new generation of learners, like Skaida'u here. We have many First Nations that are working really, really hard with the limited resources we have to try and bring their languages back. So there's a lot of action on the ground there. That's part of what we'll be talking about today is in the next decade, what we hope for our languages and what we think needs to be done from an international, somewhat perspective. So I'll leave it at that. I'd also like to say Van Gwinsi, Kame Hozo, Kame Sothan, Nkleo Shokwathan, Shrothan, and Yak E Tsutat, Kedain Tsutat, and Dinta. And that's basically a greeting in all of our languages here in the territory. So good morning to all of you. Gunashchish ha iari, Gunashchish, thank you all for coming, Shonithan. A little bit of a mix of languages, but I think that's fitting. Gunashchish.
Definitely. Chinashkamitin. That's a really important overview of the languages of this territory, and to give a bit of a national overview as well. There's about 70 plus languages, Indigenous languages in Canada, and they're all at different states. Some of them, like Etskamek, you have over 98% of the Etskamek communities that speaks the language, and in other instances, there are just a handful of people. So those are important things to consider when thinking about the decade, and sort of the needs of different communities are very different across Canada and the world. And there's also some similarities that I think we'll hear about as we get into the discussion. But before that, I'm just going to ask the panelists to say a little bit about themselves and the work that they do. And I'm going to start with you again. Tina, please.
She's really picking on me.
I'm really picking on you. I'll leave you alone eventually.
As I mentioned, Skaida'u Yichatu Saklingak Einach. My Tlingit name is Skaida'u. Daklasha Ayachat. I'm a woman from the Eagle Clan, Daisling Kwan Chatwagut. I come from Teslin. Tagish Achneshli City. My home is in Tagish. Achye Janei. Principal, Destruction Bay. I'm a principal up in Destruction Bay. And I'm also, I guess, part of me being here today is I'm doing my PhD studies, and it's looking at the decolonization of Yukon First Nation languages in Yukon schools. And I'm happy to be here. And again, thank you all for coming this morning.
Thank you. We have another Skaida'u. May I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Yaketsu Tot, good morning, everyone. I'd first like to start out with a land acknowledgement. Kaya aduane ten achtawasigu ganalchish yuhas dayacha ka kaye dunk e kwan kata anquich ankwan hastu ani kaye jichane ye yawaka kayeshi. With respect, I would like to thank the Dunk E and Ta'anquichan people for allowing me to work on your land. And these are the words of Keishi Bessie Cooley. Skaida'u ach sayitsu Kleiklich le kachenach duji. Dakla sha ayachat. Desain kwan chatsati. Roach nach sa isati. Deslin ye chat uachatsu. Akla kagane yudua sauk. Connie Jules gle kachenach achlich dukla. Kashtach kla. Mini Jules gle kachenach ka achlich dukla. Skyda u yudu sagun. Late Mary Graffy Jules gle kachenach. So I said my name is Skyda U. I choose to not use my English name. I'm a woman of the Eagle clan. I belong to the Teslin people. I am of Wolf moiety, and I was raised in Teslin too. My mom is Kagane, she's in the audience, and Connie Jules in English. My grandma is Kashtach Kla and Minnie Jules in English, and my grandma's mom was Graffy Jules and Skyda U and Shlingit, and I'm her namesake, so I'm named after her. And so I introduced my matrilineal line to really showcase where I'm from, who are the people that stand behind me and the work that I do, and it represents the matrilineal power behind, in my community. Yida yejinei tin GPI Atlantic ka videa wuch in ka hasati wushya ayaduane haani ka atgutu adi kwan kach gutlakau wushwe yatki seganen. Right now, I work with GPI Atlantic and Videa. We are together working towards respect for all, so intersectionality, but there isn't a word for that in Tlingit. So I am fighting for our earth and animal people with the Children of the Children of Tomorrow, Yukon First Nations Climate Action Fellowship. Never give up on your dreams. Yida yan chagutskun Tlingit yuchatangi kaha kusti kaha shugun kach. UAS ka SFU de wushtin, ha yuchatangi de scholar tsu tsi Alaska. Chat yenasni ha yuchatangi kach, chat yenasni ha kusti kach. Cha'an ku'a nauk yachyati ha ku'ude Yesu yadu uhan ka ke ha nashtzin. Never give up on your dreams. Right now I go to school for the Tlingit language, our way of life, and our culture at the UAS and SFU universities. I am a Tlingit language scholar for C Alaska, and I do it for our language. I do it for our way of life, although it is like medicine to our people. We are here, and we are getting stronger. Ganashish.
Next, Hans-Henrik Chuesak-Poulsen. Would you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Hans-Henrik Poulsen. I go by the nickname Hoho Suursak. And I come from a place of 50 people called Kangertluk. And I lived there until I was 9 years old, and I moved to Qaqaltaqsuaq, which has about 800 people, and it's in Disco Island. Then I moved to Norway to study dance, music, and singing. And after 1 year, I moved to Nuuk, where I started at I would say high school. Then from 2012 to 2014, I went to the National Theatre of Greenland, and I graduated in 2014. And I've been working as a freelance actor ever since. And as you heard before, I also sing, but I also do clothing design, so for my own personal gain, but also for other productions. So for the later 2 or 3 years, I've been going more into the clothing designing. So like this beautiful black anorak that I'm wearing here, something I made for this occasion. So thank you.
And we also have the pleasure of having Harold Gasky with us. Harold.
Turn to the yellow one, yes. Joo, pidi mubialiske. Mul on Ärne Juhana ja Anne Juhana ja Arne Ristena Harald. Ja len dianus seitä seede ja illuan huisaakkale täppetinkuun on niidit. I'm Ärne Risten ja Anne Juhan Harald in Sami, and I think in this connection I'll rather speak more about my background instead of who I am and what I do in my professional life, because I used to say in connections like this that I'm really happy that I'm born at the time when I was born in the mid-50s, because that was before the introduction of TV, and that was at the time when the traditional livelihoods still were thriving, and really it was possible to make a livelihood out of that. So I grew up fairly traditionally and learned Sami as my first language, both on my mother's and father's side. And I learned how to practice or conduct the traditional livelihoods. I must admit, I've never done that myself, but since after that becoming an academic, I find it very appropriate to having the theoretical knowledge about all the traditional livelihoods instead of then having to practice them for making a living. But anyway, that also meant that I actually grew up with lots of storytelling and have that background, which I'm really happy for, because that was then one of the driving forces for me when I wanted to seek education. And that's the other reason I'm so happy that I was born 10 years after the Second World War, when Norway really had started to make progress again. So it was possible for kids coming from small communities like Hans Henrik, mine community also consisted of like 50 persons altogether. But still I could go to the high school and then continuing with university, and after a while university became my workplace. So having all that storytelling, all those traditional practices as my background, it was very natural to choose Sami literature as my field of study, because literature also covers storytelling, and it gives you an opportunity to really delve into traditional values and the worldview of the people. So I'm happy for that, and that's what I'm mainly doing in my teaching and research now. But it took me 20 years, of course, because it was a Western schooling I went through, and it took me 20 years to realize that, well, I can't just continue to be a white man in a Sami school system. So over the last decade or few decades, I started to Samify my teaching, make it more in accordance to Sami values and worldviews, and which then also combines and correlates very well with this new indigenous methodology, thinking that we are all practicing more or less all over the indigenous world. Sorry for the long introduction, but that's me. You always run a risk giving the mic to a university professor, because then he'll speak for 45 minutes and then take a 10-minute break and continue for another 45 minutes.
Thank you all for sharing a little bit more about yourselves and the work that you do. I thought we'd start off by inviting you to share a word from each of your languages that sort of gives a glimpse into your worldviews. And I'm not going to pick on you, Tina. I'm going to ask Harold to start, if you don't mind.
Yes, very. Why do I always get the ones that don't? Okay. You're just trying to make me nervous here. Okay. Yeah. Okay. No, that was a very good question. We got that prior to the panel, so I actually had time to think about it, and I chose kuldalit in Sami, which means to listen, and it means actually to listen to and listen for. It means to listen with your ears, but you can also listen with your hand, and it also contains the ability to listen in order to learn and to respect. So a child should listen to his or her parents and grandparents, and in that way become a good citizen after a while. And then, but also listening to the surroundings, listening to the earth, listening to the birds, animals, and having that communication going on with all your environment is really important. And I think when we are speaking of traditional knowledge and also the respect for the elders, listening is really, or guldalit is really a good term to choose in that connection, because it gives all the associations to a good life where you pay respect to the traditional values, you pay respect to your neighbors, and you really listen to what our co-inhabitants, the animals, the birds, the grass, the land, also says to you. So being able to receive all the messages you get and to transform them into your way of living then.
Sky Dao, would you go next with a word that's meaningful to you?
Sure. Is this working? Oh. Yeah, I'm glad we got some time to think about it as well. The word for me that I thought of was iguayajuan, and that word, we use it when if you've lost a family member and you're grieving and you want to not just comfort someone, but give them some guidance, really soft guidance on do the best that you can do. It just means so much. And when I think about my daughters when they were little and we'd be taking them to school, Iguayajuan or Yiguayajuan, there's two of them. And that would mean, again, similar, but it's like have courage, be brave, do your best. And then I would throw in some English to them too. It also means to respect your teacher and remember that you're going to school to learn. Treat everybody good. And we use that word in other ways too. It's almost like in doing your best, in going forward, moving forward in life, don't forget who you are. You are Daklasha, you are Eagle. You're from the Eagle clan. You represent all of us. And so that means so much about how we behave, how we conduct ourselves, how we speak. Because if you don't, there's always, if you do something wrong, that reflects not just on you, but your family and your whole clan and your community. And it's like a code of conduct all in its own, but it's positive and very similar to what you were talking about. So, Iguayajuan.
Beautiful. It sounds like I almost hear there's also something about past, present, future all tied into that word.
Which makes me think of the other word I was going to share. Ha-shuka. That's, some of you may know it that are sitting down, that are from the Yukon here, as being a different version of it. Ha-shagun, our history. Ha-shuka, those that have come before us, our ancestors. Those of us here right now, including our children, everybody here in this life, and those that are going to come. And I'll talk more about that because I was thinking about what does language mean to me from the perspective, when I think about it from the framework of Ha-shuka. So, yeah, it's all tied together. It really isn't separate.
Yeah. Hans Henrik, you don't have one? Okay, no worries. Do you have a word you want to share with us?
My auntie took all the good ones. No. Yeah, I was thinking of the word is short and sweet, but it's ku'u, ku'u, ku'u. And I learned about this word recently, and the more that I learn language, the more phrases become my favorite, and so it's kind of hard to choose one. But this one, the ku means people, and the u means the world. So it represents this relationship of the world owning us as people and the people owning the world. And so it represents this balance, this reciprocal relationship, and holding each other up, and without one, there will not be the other.
Beautiful. Tinashkamitten. Hans Henrik.
I have one now. So the ones of what I've heard, the ones I've thought about was ayung idak amma. Ayung idak, it means, directly translated, it's not bad. And amma, it means again. So ayung idak amma, like if you fail at anything, you would say, ayung idak amma, come on, you got this, you can do it again. So ayung idak means it's okay, do it again. So ayung idak amma.
That's a good word to know when you're learning a language. Right, yeah. Tinashkamitten. So you all shared words that have so much meaning and so much depth and nuance, and I wondered what you thought about translation. So what gets lost in translation? What gets found in translation? What approaches do you think we should take when thinking about translating Indigenous languages? I'm going to ask Harold to kick us off with this one.
I think Hans Henrik has a very good story about that, but all right, because I do a lot of translations of poetry into Norwegian and English from Sami. So, representing minority languages and indigenous languages, we always are dependent on translations because we can't, of course, speak our own language, but if no one understands what we're saying, then there's really no communication going on. So translation is really fundamental for indigenous peoples, and we need good translators. But that said, I also think it is important in the sense, because we're also speaking about the meaning and the position of arts compared in connection with indigenous languages and the Indigenous Language Decade. And I think art has the possibility of really getting across with the message much easier than we do in traditional education and schooling and research. So therefore I found it really satisfying to translate poetry. And even though I try to be quite loyal to the original text, but of course it is a new, every translation is an interpretation, the first interpretation, but also a new version of the original. But still, I think at least what I've learned from my practice is that it's really interesting to hear the response and what kind of new associations the translation gives to the new reader, the non-Sami reader. So sometimes you're surprised, well, that wasn't really the content of the Sami original, but of course languages are like that, and like poetry it's art, and art gives you different kinds of understanding. You interpret it differently. So again, this richness that languages creates, and the freedom it holds for everyone to have his or her own interpretation of what they read, I feel is really great, and it's something that we should acknowledge and also be happy about. So, because sometimes I feel the indigenous peoples are so narrow-minded in our way of expressing ourselves that if it's not totally literally translated into the mainstream, into the majority language, then we complain about it. Well, that wasn't what I meant. But that's not the way communication should go, because you also should give freedom to the receiver of the message to interpret it in his or her own free way. So no, I really like translations, even though the original, of course, always is the best.
Thank you. Hans Henrik, you had something to say.
Yeah, we talked about work and how language affects your work. In terms of being an actor, language is like the most important, one of the most important things of them all, because not only have we the language, we also have the body, but we also have the mind. And a lot of the times when we work as an actor, we often have directors from outside who don't speak Greenlandic, our language. And it is often that we work trilingually, so we would like speak Greenlandic to our mates, like, and then we would speak Danish to the other, and then most of the times we would speak English to the director or whatever language that they speak. And sometimes it's very hard, like, to work trilingually every day for 2 months. And we often have, if they want us to Greenlandify or Inuitify the show, direct translation often doesn't work, because many communities and many cultures have different ways of thinking, and Inuit have a certain way of thinking as well. So for example, if we were to translate something directly into the Greenlandic, it wouldn't make sense for us. We have to shift it and make it more our version of whatever that topic is. So language is very important, but also making them more Greenlandic so Greenlandic people can understand is very important as well.
Thank you. I'm curious from educator, learner perspectives, how you guys think about translation. Did you want to go first, Kaido?
Yeah, I can go first. I was just thinking of a story of when I first started to learn language and working with my elder Anaslahash, Sam Johnson, and I had all my scripts ready to do recordings, and I would, for example, some of the phrases could have been like, that beautiful iridescent bird flying with fluttering wings. It's like, that doesn't translate to Tlingit. That's not how our people would describe things like that. We would have to switch their mindset. So from 2.5 years of straight learning language, I have come to this point of really like thinking, how would our old people say this? To really like deconstructing and decolonizing my brain, and to try to think of it and flip the script. And it cuts a lot of time in half, and still it does change again. Once they translate it to English again, it'll change again. So it's really interesting to work with some elders and then different elders, because they even have different ways that they would translate something. Like, it means something different to somebody else, but it could be around the same lines. But for some elders, they only want their translation and transcription to be the last one on that work if you're working with them. So it's interesting to see and navigate this in like my language learning process, to really like hold up and honor the speakers, but at the same time to still keep the language learning movement, and to try to use these not as something to hold us back, but to honor each speaker and honor our ancestors' words, because their words are the ones that live on through these translations, and to be able to share this with our people who not all the time can take the time out of their lives to learn our languages, but still should learn this beautiful way and poetic way that we used to describe things.
Hans Henrik, you had something you wanted to jump in.
I thought of, we did a performance in January. We had a Japanese director, and it was a story of a little girl, as a story from Nepal. And the show itself was called The Little Goddess. And we don't have a word for goddess in Greenlandic, so we were thinking, what should we name this story or that performance? And we were thinking, we were asking on Facebook, we were asking our friends, and it ended up being Islom Nachtungwak, the little holy one, because that's the best, closest translation we could get to. So.
Yeah, that's a great story. There's also this, we discussed a little bit yesterday, this idea of modernizing the language as well, which will get to, but I want to give you a chance, Skaidau, to talk a little bit about translation and how it affects your work as an educator and a learner.
Thanks, everybody, for sharing. When I think about translation, it's from the perspective of me being a learner. And yeah, it's definitely can be a sensitive topic that does need attention and a delicate approach. For me, it did not help me to learn just to have a general translation. I'll give you an example. Tlingit shawat chatsiti. I am a Tlingit woman. That's what it would say in all of the language books, right, when we were learning. But when you go deeper into the language, and I'd like to acknowledge Dr. James Crippen here, Zeesh, who is generous with his linguistic knowledge. Tlingit is human being, so Tlingit shawat chatsiti. Tlingit is human being, no gender there. Shawat is woman, like a woman, like it's specific to that. Chat, that's me, who I am. And it's not just me, it's everything about me. Siti is like the way I exist, the way I am, the me here in this world. And so I have often thought, gee, how come I wasn't taught all of that when I learned Tlingit Shawat Chatsiti? Because it would have really, really helped me. And so when I look at a lot of the resources in the Yukon, it's almost like we need to go back and we could call it decolonize, or we could call it adding our perspective to the translations that are done, because most of them are general, like I am a Tlingit woman, right? If we have, I find as a learner, if we have segmenting, which breaks down the language and tells you what each part means, and glossing, that's another level of translations, and general, show some different examples of general, and then have the person make sense of it themselves. To me, from a pedagogical, from a teaching perspective, that would really help, would have helped somebody like me. So it's interesting when you look at all my language resources, if you come to my place, I have flagged every pedagogical issue I can think of. So there's stickies everywhere for ideas on how can we strengthen our documentation inclusive of our translations for the purpose of teaching and for the purpose of learning. So
on a similar vein, we often hear elders say that languages come from the land, they're shaped by the land. We talked a little bit about modernizing languages. We know that Indigenous people, we live in different places and not always on the land. So how do you see the impacts and the relationship between language, land, and where we live? And maybe how art can maybe bridge things or not? Harold, did you want to start off on that?
Oh, yes. Like in Sami, we have lots and lots of terms for snowy conditions. More than 300. We actually compete with Greenlandic there, but I think we are on the winning side there. And that's actually true, because there are linguists who doubt that we do have that many terms, but we do, and it's easy to understand that with the traditional livelihoods and the knowledge you needed about snow and ice in earlier times, it was natural then that the language developed a lot of specific terms to that. But the same with reindeer, the salmon. I come from Dietno, which is a big and good salmon river for the wild Atlantic salmon, which now definitely is under threat because of all this farming industry that has all these lies and lies in both ways. They are lying about the importance of farmed salmon, and they bring a lot of lies that kill the original wild salmon. But that's another story. But anyway, we have lots of terms for salmon and So in that sense, it also is a challenge for translations on that side. But on the other side, it also points to the close relationship there has been between the language and the livelihoods and definitely the land. So, and we are connected to land, and it's all about the land for indigenous people. So what is important to mention in this setting, and when we're talking about the UN Indigenous Decade for Indigenous Languages, is that we need to pay much more attention to the richness of the traditional languages, and not look at them just as tradition in an old way, that it's something that has to do with olden times, but it's not relevant anymore. We need to develop our languages into being relevant for today's world, today's activities, and look at languages as really a great reservoir for the knowledge we have, the knowledge that has made us into who we are as indigenous people. So if we lose the language, we lose so much of our knowledge and our identity, because identity then, of course, is connected to yourself, to your ability to communicate with the land, with others. So language is so much more than just a means of communication. So in that sense, it definitely ties you to your community, it ties you to your background, it ties you to the land where you live. But it is, of course, also a wonderful means of communicating with the rest of the world. So doing it on our own terms, but in ways that are understandable for everyone. So, oh yes, languages is something that really needs not only a decade, but really some appraisal and lots of happiness around it. So instead of just speaking of languages as something complicated, we should rather look at them as something that is fun and great fun to work with.
Yes, I had an elder say to me recently, our language smiles, like they're just trying to capture the sort of the joy in the language. Yeah, thank you for that. I also think that languages, like in terms of for the benefit of humankind, they are guides to sustainable living, you know, and so they do hold those keys. Did you want to comment on that, Skyda?
Yeah, I'm currently a part of this beautiful program called the Children of Tomorrow. It's built up from all of the 14 Yukon First Nations, and we're all youth from across this territory. And so we get together and create like an action plan and a reconnection vision and action plan, talking about the way that we're reconnecting with the land, with our language, with our ways of life, our culture, because we believe it's all interconnected. And in this work that we do with revitalizing our ways of life, we're finding all of these intricate interconnections and these almost like rule books or these secrets that are being unlocked from our indigenous languages, of how we were natural stewards of the land and how we took care of the land and how we lived in harmony with our non-human relatives. There's a word in Tlingit that's called Kwan, and it means the people of. But when we refer to trees, we say Os Kwan, the tree people. We refer to many of our non-human relatives as people because we hold them up to that same respect as we do ourselves. And it represents this way, this deep respect that as Indigenous peoples, and our language holds these secrets that we have for protecting our lands and protecting our ways of life, because it's interchangeable, it's connected. I just think back to this past semester in university where I had the experience to work on a dugout canoe. So it was a 40-foot dugout canoe made from a red cedar log. And we bless the log before we even started, and we thank the tree people because we have a phrase in Tlingit that's and it means in everything there's a spirit. And so this art and the way that we do things like carving this red cedar log, it really shows this full circle of like coming from the tree people to this art form and being able to work as something that's sustainable for our people to revitalize our culture. So, Ganesh Chish.
Tash Gwynton for sharing that. Hans Henrik.
As I mentioned before, I come from a place of 50 people where majority of them only speak Greenlandic, and my grandparents and my parents, they don't speak English or Danish at all. And I remember I must have been around 7 or 8 years old when a boy from Qaqataswa came to Gangatluk, and he was counting from 1 to 10 in English, and I thought, that's so cool. Like, I want to be able to do that. So when we moved to Qaqataswa, that's where I started learning Danish and English. So I could make myself understandable, but then I moved to Norway, and I started learning Norwegian and Spanish as a second language. And I actually ended up forgetting Danish when I came back. When I came to Greenland, everyone was like, and it sounded so awful in my ears because I was used to Norwegian language now. But then I came back to Qaqatassuaq, where my grandparents live, also my parents, and I started to listen to my grandparents, and a lot of the words that they say I didn't understand because I have forgotten about it because I learned Norwegian. And I would use, like, while listening to them, I would use my dictionary to understand some words. Then I said, I have to get my together, and learn their language fully. And so I started eavesdropping, like, also other dialects of Greenland, especially East Greenland and northern part of Greenland. And I would tell, because we have 3 main dialects in Greenland, which is West Greenlandic, Thule dialect, and East Greenlandic dialect. And I would tell my friends, don't use West Greenlandic on me, use your own dialects. And when I don't understand anything, I will, let you know so I can understand what you're talking about. And so I started learning their dialect, and I started learning Inuit dialect as well. But then I came to Canada, it must have been in 2014 or 13, there were people from Nunavut and Nunavik, and I told them, use your dialect so I can understand. So I actually started learning Nunavik dialect, which is northern Quebec of Greenland, Inuktitut. And and it gives you this deeper understanding of all Inuit languages, how they all are connected to each other. I remember a friend telling me there was during ICC in the 80s, there was this elder from East Greenland listening to a man from Alaska, Inupiaq. And he took off his hearing aids or, translating equipment because he could understand what he was saying. Like, we're so far away, but still language connects us all. So I'm still learning the different languages and different dialects of Inuit languages, and hopefully I'll make use of them in the future. Yeah.
That's amazing. It's just amazing. We only have a few minutes left, and I was fearful of this, that we'd run out of time. I do want to ask each of you really quickly to share with us what you hope to see at the end of this decade of Indigenous languages. And Skydau, I'm going to pick on you because it's my last chance to do that.
We just met yesterday. I was thinking about that question that we went over, and what I would like to see. Well, I think it's sufficient time and I'm going to talk about the Yukon here, and I think it's sufficient time to have all 8 of our languages recognized as official, not less than official languages in the Yukon Territory, right alongside English and French, number 1. Number 2, that our First Nation governments and the Yukon government as well start initiating full-bore, not only language training programs, but for business to start being done in the language. And And of course, that would initiate training programs that need to happen and incentive programs for the staff they have or their citizens. I'd like to see where language is vibrant in our homes for those that are either they have families with young kids or they're going to have kids. Lots of them. Just to bring that back where our young ones, that's the language they hear when they're in the womb, that's the language they're born into, and that's the language that they are fluent in. And of course, English is going to come alongside that. You're going to pick it up, it's all around us. And so by the time they get to school, that they're actually fluent. So I think in 10 years, it gives us enough time to look at school programs. They don't necessarily need to be designed around to teach children language because in the best case scenario, the children would be speaking the language already. So the K-12 program would enhance the language similar to how it does to English and French. I would like, yesterday I was thinking about, oh, you told me to be fast? Gee, I was just going here. Going down a berry trail for sure. I'd like public places to go where I can go and have dinner in Tlingit or dinner in Dundee or go to the movie and I don't have to speak English there. And we have to create those places to go, not just in our traditional territories on our lands, but in public places. I think a lot about Yukon First Nations citizens or First Nations people, Indigenous people in Canada, the people that don't live on their settlement lands. That is over half the people now. And I was listening to Dr. Lorna Williams, watching her videos last night, and Murray Sinclair listening to him, and they just reminded me that people who do not live on their settlement lands have a right to their language just as much as those that live back at home. They shouldn't be deprived of it. And so I'd like to see things like that addressed within 10 years, and I think it's sufficient time to be able to have fluent speaking teachers, fluent speaking lawyers, fluent speaking doctors, and just to keep going for it. I know we get tired, but if you give yourself time to experience the joy and the fun in our language, it just cracks us up. Like looking at Kaganay, we're cracking up right now. Gonna sheesh.
I know that Harold's going to be fast because he has a panel to go moderate, so Harold should.
Yeah, I'll be short for once. And because in an ideal world where we would have lots of economic resources, personal resources, and so on, I would really love to see more inter-tribal, inter-indigenous languages translations, and so we could. Like we have 10 different Sami languages, and 2 of them are so distant from each other, like German and English. So we need to translate between our own languages as well, and we don't do that. We usually translate from one Sami into one of the mainstream languages, but also on the international indigenous level, I would like to see like anthologies where we translate our own texts into the other indigenous languages instead of always having to go through English or Spanish or whatever mainstream majority language. So building up more of that competence, that possibility, and spending more funding on that would be really something I would prioritize. Because, and then like I forgot earlier to say, this connection between Iano, Etno, and Etni, the water, the river, the earth and mother, and which all connects them together because water is so important for us. Land, of course, is important, and all of us come out of a mother. So connecting ourselves to Mother Earth and having all these connections to our sisters and brothers all over the world, in the indigenous world, and then having that third step level of these international connections to all the mainstream societies, majority societies, because our world and our voice should definitely be heard in the world, because I think we have an important message to bring to the world. Not only for the next 10 years, but for the next 100 years, because I hope we'll stay that long.
We definitely need a century of indigenous languages and maybe more. Hans Henrik.
In the 1950s and 60s, there was this movement called G50 and G60, which is modernization of Greenland, where Danish was the way to go, they said. That's, if you want a higher education, you have to learn Danish. And because of that, there was this huge thing of identity being taken away, because not only did they grow up only speaking Danish, but it ended up impacting on the next generation. So the ones that came after, like, they didn't speak Greenlandic, and of course a lot of them could understand it, but they didn't speak it. So it was this feeling of being lost. Am I a Greenlandic man or am I a Danish man, you know? But the next generation after that, because I have friends who primarily speak Danish to me, but they understand Greenlandic, because I would switch between Greenlandic and Danish all the time. That's what we do in the bigger cities in Greenland. So Danish is very prominent as well. And but their kids, because they speak their best Greenlandic to them, so they actually are growing up speaking Greenlandic, but their parents are like trying to learn with them. So there is a huge shift of these younger generations of speaking more and more Greenlandic. Like, even though they also speak more Danish or English because of YouTube and globalization and all that. And I see like 6-year-olds speaking perfect English. I'm like, I couldn't do that when I was small. And they speak like perfect American accent. I'm like, am I getting old? But then there is this trilinguality in Greenland that is happening right now. Before it was only like Danish and English, Danish and Greenlandic. So, but their children are speaking more and more Greenlandic. So I see it as a good sign of speaking more Greenlandic in the bigger cities. Of course, the smaller communities and cities, there are like mainly Greenlandic speaking people. So.
I think you reminded us that it takes a generation or two to lose a language, but it also just takes a generation or two to find it again, to reawaken it. Skaidau, you give us such hope when we hear you speak. I'm happy to let you have the last word.
Yeah, I was just thinking that from a student perspective, in 10 years, it would be amazing to have things that we do in like our traditional land, such as moose hide tanning, hunting, harvesting, creating traditional medicines, and making those creditable things that we can use in universities, and kind of taking out those general education requirements so that we can start building and kind of decolonizing these education systems that aren't going to go away, but we can indigenize them and make our way of life more like attainable to our people that want to learn it, and to take away those barriers. And it would be great to see like language speaking households with not only like mother, child, and grandmother, but also even like roommates that all speak the language, and just like normalizing language being in these different settings, and seeing and normalizing language on social media, on TikTok, on Instagram, because those things are going to be around for a long time, but we can also take back that power and use these use these platforms and talking about the importance of our languages and normalizing seeing them and making our youth and the ones coming up to have these good Indigenous representations that they can look up to. And one day, 7 to 8 years from now, when I'm thinking about having kids, it would be great to have language nests and things that we like have fully people speaking the language and doing all these cultural activities with our kids. And hopefully, I think that's a good amount of time to have that ready and up and running by then.
Well, Shinashkmiten, everyone, for being here today with us, and to our panelists, wishing everyone a good day.